Hi, great. I'm glad that tech-wise, that everything's working on my side. But hi, Natalie. Great to talk to you today. So glad we
Hi,
could connect.
Courtney. Good morning. Yeah,
Good
likewise.
morning.
No technology snafus so far.
Perfect. So I know kind of similarly to what was kind of being talked to at the end of the last panel, I think a lot of people want to know kind of how people get into the financial space. How do they get in potentially into fintech? How did you actually get into this vertical specifically?
Yeah, my journey I think was maybe a little more unique. Admittedly, I just sort of fell into it. So caveat being I've been in the fintech space for about 11 or 12 years. So quite a while since I think before fintech may have even been a term. Had a very formative experience very early on. I graduated in the midst of the last financial crisis and just so happened to one of my first jobs being as a financial counselor and a credit counselor. And that ended up being the most amazing user experience you can possibly imagine. So, having lots of one on one conversations with people in very dire financial straits. And it really made me realize how poorly served most Americans are and were at the time by, most legacy financial institutions and systems at the time. So this was at the time where fintech, I guess, I don't know, 1.0 started to emerge. So some of the early players, one of those being Lending Club, started sort of got my attention. It just so happened that Lending Club had an office right next door to the credit counseling agency I was at. So ended up at Lending Club as my first fintech job, and then that just sort of set the trajectory. But it was really that experience early on, really just talking with people one-on-one that made me realize this was a huge opportunity and huge area of friction. And that fintech was just a massive opportunity to upend these systems that had managed to remain largely untouched despite, technology moving, all these other industries years ahead.
Yeah, it's actually crazy. I think we all kind of realized the importance of fintech once the pandemic hit and people weren't going out and doing traditional banking and kind of not only turned to kind of being able to access your money quickly, but kind of that experience has really grown, I think, over the last 2 years. It's crazy. I think we're still kind of in it, but 2 years ago.
It,
Um,
it's been impressive seeing the massive acceleration over the last 2 years of fintech just take off. Yeah, I think to your point, we're very much realizing how much it's needed, especially with certain segments and demographics who are just very much underserved by traditional banks.
mhm. And switching a little bit to the topic at hand, I know in kind of our conversations that we've had, we've obviously been talking about kind of this female role within the finance space, but how have you kind of seen, obviously you've been working in the fintech space for a while, have you kind of seen that evolution in female roles within that space?
Yeah, I don't think it's a surprise that fintech in general, women tend to be underrepresented. If you think about financial services, women are underrepresented. If you think about technology, women are underrepresented. Of course, in fintech, women tend to be underrepresented. I think we've made a lot of progress from what I've seen over the last few years. When I started, it was very much a boys' club. A lot of the typical finance bros you would expect. I think we've made a lot of headway. Some of that I think is just the pipelines, especially at the college level and STEM roles, really opening up to women. I think what's really interesting as well is this recognition, especially for fintech products that are trying to design for you know, people who are trying to design financial inclusion products. I think it's very hard and to hire people who look like the product you're trying to build for. That's a issue I see all the time. When you're trying to build a product for people who are living to paycheck or you know are tend to be lower in terms of income. I think especially in Silicon Valley, we typically don't look like those people. I think especially we've come to realize how much representation matters in terms of building products that look like our consumers. So I think especially when it comes to female representation too, we're starting to understand that women have very different financial needs. And actually, especially if you're building products towards financial inclusion, those will just disproportionately impact women. So over time, I think it's also the case too that women tend to be attracted towards these more mission-driven companies that are working on tough problems of financial inclusion. So I think just naturally the talent pool is starting to skew more and more female.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of talked, I think, about how product tends to be, I think, a little bit more male driven, but you said you've seen kind of on what you've worked on that the marketing side has kind of lent itself though to more female roles and kind of that progression on that side.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to work at a company, Chime, where we do have really strong female leadership at the product level as well as at the marketing level. I've certainly seen at past orgs and as well as talking to female colleagues who are also in the space. Marketing does tend to be more of a female-led org often. Product women tend to be underrepresented, especially in leadership positions. That can be problematic for all the reasons we just talked about in terms of product designing features and products for people who may not look like them, especially when it comes to women. I think we've certainly made a lot of headway on that front, especially in terms of women leadership in product leadership positions. But certainly in past roles where we've had that gender imbalance across orgs, that can sometimes impact how marketing and product works together. I think one, it can be difficult as a woman to establish credibility, especially in a predominantly male org. And so what I often found was in order to establish that credibility, I had to, one, rely on male allies, which unfortunately is important, but also really relying on external resources from established people with a lot of growth credibility. So whether it was a framework from Andrew Chen or somewhere else, right? So working with some of my male colleagues at past places, you run into that issue of like, oh, you have this great idea and you say it and it just falls on deaf ears. You either need a male colleague to amplify it, or you have to explain, oh, well, this is actually from, a growth engineer at Pinterest. So I think we've made some progress on that front. What I think is unique about that, though, in terms of marketing tending to skew more female and product tending to skew more male, there is an opportunity in that marketing has potentially like the ability to form the product roadmap more, because I think marketing often has a lot of insights about who our members are, especially if they tend to skew female, right? We can help make sure that the products and features that product is building is actually going to best serve our members. And especially when it comes to things like go-to-market strategy, making sure that the value props we're using are ones that will resonate with our female audience.
Mm-hmm. And kind of off those lines, I think we had kind of chatted about, do you ever feel that Chime is on the marketing side really directing specific messaging towards female audiences? I know it's very interesting to see that I think sometimes we forget that the product, even though it has the same utility, is really being used very differently between a male and female audience. Do you think the messaging kind of aligns with some of those use cases?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So for some context, Chime's the largest neobank in the United States. Traditionally, we serve people who have been underbanked and who tend to be lower income. So you can imagine that also tends to be women, since women tend to earn less on average. We haven't set forth an explicit segmentation strategy, but it certainly informs a lot of our messaging in very implicit ways, which is why I think female representation in marketing and product roles is so important, because you have to understand how some of those what you don't want is, to have some sort of unconscious bias. And obviously you want to make sure your value props are actually resonating with your members and your users. So having that representation, understand who your users are and if they are women, right? I think it's important that you have representation at the marketing and product level to make sure that your messaging strategy is actually aligning with your users. So in terms of segmentation strategy, we haven't, necessarily explicitly segmented by gender, but certainly in terms of our product offerings. So whether it's our fee-free overdraft, which is designed to get people to their next paycheck, we find that women use that far more than men because women are more likely to overdraft given their unique financial needs. I think we're also very careful not to introduce a lot of unconscious bias in those value props. So what we have seen is some competitors who also have a fee-free overdraft with a sort of tipping business model. What we've seen from some of those competitors is that they will play up certain value props around altruism and I would say guilt tripping. And they use predominantly female stock images. And that's probably because they've figured out that women tend to tip more and tip higher amounts on average. And so you have this interesting dichotomy where, these fee-free overdraft products can be beneficial, especially if you think about how disproportionately women are impacted by overdrafts. And you get these sort of snowball overdraft situations where women keep overdrafting on small dollar amounts given their unique transaction tendencies versus men. But then, right, you introduce a business model that actually exploits some of those unique needs that predominantly impact women. So that's something we're very conscious of and we very much avoid in our marketing.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, do you think there's specific initiatives that you guys run that have been extremely effective? Obviously, it seems like you're avoiding kind of that direct targeting message, but is there anything that you think is kind of holistically worked well that kind of also benefits female audiences, whether that be just specific messaging or more just product tailored initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, what's exciting right now, we're starting to delve more and more into the world of personalization. Obviously, we have to be very careful with that. There's often lots of paradoxes with personalization in terms of balancing privacy and then kind of very similar, making sure that we're not introducing a lot of unconscious bias, even if we can do one-to-one type personalization. Certainly, though, that level of personalization will hopefully mean we can do more benefits-focused marketing. So if you think about something like our credit builder product, right? The initial use case of, I want to improve my credit score, we can certainly do some level of segmentation around that, but then getting the next level deeper of, why do you want to improve your credit score? And certainly, why women may want to improve their credit score, why men want to improve their credit score. There's probably a lot of overlap, but there may be some unique needs that we can certainly play up the benefits of for our female members. So that's something we're starting to explore. But I would say we're not necessarily explicitly, pursuing more of like a gender segmentation strategy. It's really just understanding what our member needs are at a one-to-one level. It just so happens that, what we will probably find is, there will be certain personas with different needs and women may fall into certain personas disproportionately.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting on our side in the influencer space, and we've been doing a lot of reporting, I think, because of the growth of just the industry on social. I know in the last conversation, they were kind of talking about TikTok and how a lot of financial brands are starting to test out TikTok now that, it's been around in the space for a while. But we've actually seen that there's been a huge number of female financial influencers that are offering tips, especially around specific females focused issues, whether that be, saving because they're the ones that are kind of managing finances for a family. But also we've seen this huge growth with diverse female influencers within the financial space and kind of adding a very different lens on, I think, some of the issues that come up. So it's very interesting, like you're saying, that there are so many issues within the financial space that it's become very broad and kind of the ability to target all of those different interests and segments.
Yeah, and I think you see that too in a little bit of the fragmentation, especially of the neobank space, right? Chime is one of the early front runners, but what you've seen in recent years is all these very niche neobanks, whether it's Greenwood or Ellevest. A lot of these financial institutions are springing up because there are many different ways or many different personas out there with very unique financial needs. I think the challenge is designing a product that has wide enough appeal and that can appeal to all these different segments and all their unique individual needs.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I think also coming off the lines of the last conversation, I think a lot of individuals that are kind of reaching the point where they're millennial or slightly older, or even we're seeing this a little bit with Gen Z, are trying to figure out, how to get into finance. What are they going to do financially? We're on the brink of a recession. From just a career standpoint, what advice would you give to women looking to get into the finance or the fintech space?
Yeah, there's so many great resources out there now. One, I think it's good to, start with an understanding of money movement, credit processing, credit score processing, and debit processing, and how all those different systems work in a very holistic way. There's so many opportunities, and I think industry events out there. I'd also just say, it's always great to. One thing I've seen, we also hire a lot of marketers who don't necessarily have fintech experience per se. A lot of them have come from other tech companies. So I think it's still a fairly easy jump to make from other ancillary areas of tech into fintech. I actually personally think it's harder to hire for marketing expertise than it is for fintech expertise. I think the fintech expertise is a little bit easier to develop. That said, I think there is a huge area of opportunity to for marketers with specific financial services expertise, kind of going into understanding how those different systems work. Certainly helps when it comes to your go-to-market strategies, and then also just having a deep user understanding of what the different segments and personas and what their unique financial needs are. Especially, right, if you don't come from a similar background to the audience or the users that you're trying to target.
And then one more question, I think, before we get into Q&A. So I always like to ask this, I think, because sometimes we get so focused into the day-to-day of marketing that we kind of forget some of the bigger picture. So what's one thing that you're looking forward to in kind of the back half of the year personally, and one thing that you're looking forward to professionally?
Yeah. So professionally, it's a very interesting time to be in fintech. We're certainly going through a bloodbath. I actually think I tend to view chaos as an opportunity. I think there's been a bit of a gold rush in the fintech industry. And I think when that happens, you often see people moving into the space for maybe the wrong reasons. I think what's happening now, will, I hope, hopefully be healthy for the industry in the long term. I think what's especially exciting for those who are working on products in the financial inclusion space, this is a time where your product is going to be more needed now than ever. There's never a time where your users or audience are going to need to use your product. So if anything, if you're there for the right reasons, for the mission, right, this is going to be a very fulfilling time, I think, for a lot of people in the space. In terms of personal life, it's hard. Coming off of the last 2 years of COVID, we're starting to finally do some travel. That said, I have a 3-year-old, and traveling with a 3-year-old, I don't know. I'm looking forward to returning back to normal, whatever that looks like. Not that there is a real like return to the baseline pre-COVID. But I think just what I'm really looking forward to is human connection again. I think a lot of us are craving that after the last 2 years. So looking forward to finally catching up with friends and families and going to some many overdue weddings.
It's funny, I have a new 5-month-old nephew, and it's the first child in the family, and everyone's like, oh, you're gonna travel? My brother's like, no, not for a while. Don't know if we can do that much travel with a child, but yeah, I think travel, in most of the conversations I've had, travel seems to be the top kind of, everyone's ready to get back into regular travel and kind of have some sense of normalcy, I think, just from being remote for so long.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any questions that they'd like to submit, but I think while we wait for questions to come in, one thing that you kind of started to touch on that's going to be very interesting in kind of this recession, leading up to recession and the amount of inflation that we're seeing right now, especially for those of us who are lucky enough to live in California and gas is like $7 a gallon. Have you guys kind of seen certain planning, whether that be from the product side or the marketing side, kind of what are you guys envisioning it's going to look like in the back half of the year and into next year? Any type of trends or things that you guys are starting to prepare for?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, if you think about the core products that Chime offers, really these just lend themselves very well to a high inflationary environment and environment in a recession environment. So, I mean, more than ever, people are going to be living paycheck to paycheck. It's going to, people are more likely to overdraft when they fill up at the gas station. I think I just read something that many gas stations are now doing $70 authorization holds. Lots of people aren't going to be able to afford that and aren't going to be hit with overdraft fees. So if anything, we're starting to realize the value props of Chime are going to be more important now than ever before. So even though we're sort of riding off of these COVID tailwinds, and there was a lot of tailwinds in the neobank space in terms of mobile first banking, not all of those, I would say, neobanks necessarily have a product that are tailored to what are sort of some of the new emerging financial needs that a lot of consumers are going to be facing. So especially paycheck liquidity, credit scores will be negatively impacted. So the ability to repair credit, those are going to be very important now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. And then from just a marketing side, obviously fintech and neobanks, this use case is kind of, it tends to lend itself towards a slightly younger audience. Do you guys feel like you're still targeting from a market perspective on social, because that's where a lot of younger audiences live? Do you guys kind of do a broad media mix? How do you guys kind of structure that to target the audiences that would most likely be using the app?
Yeah, so we do have a very broad marketing mix. Social is something we're exploring more and more. Certainly TikTok is a channel we're starting to test into more frequently. We're really invested in building a community, especially on our social channels. So we think organic growth will be important. I think a lot of companies too will, I would imagine, would start looking more and more towards organic growth as a lever. As there's pressure to deliver lower CAC. So that's something we're continuing to double down on.
Mhm. And I know at the beginning you kind of mentioned you've seen a lot of competitors that may be leaning towards marketing strategies that overtly target women, whether that be just those that are being used in the imaging that's being used, or whether that's doing social good. Have there been any specific learnings that you guys have really taken in-house to kind of make sure that you're still targeting a broader audience? You're not, distinctly targeting, males versus females or specific segments over others?
I think one example. So we were rolling out our expanded ATM network, and a lot of our initial value props were around convenience. I think some initial testing we did sort of yielded some interesting findings around, not just convenience, but also safety and cleanliness, but especially the safety part, which, predominantly is something women care more about. So you're going to an ATM, you're withdrawing money, you want to make sure your ATM's in a safe location and not some sketchy alley somewhere. And so I think that was an interesting learning in terms of making sure that we're doing the underlying user research to find what those value props are. I think it's very easy to come up with a new feature or new product. But in terms of being able to do that benefits focused marketing, if you don't have that underlying research, it's hard to actually tailor those value props to deliver an effective go-to-market moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people that don't work in the financial space don't realize how much research is really needed, because it's obviously banking, everyone banks or invests or manages finance, and everyone does it for a very specific reason within certain segments. So I think it's very interesting the level of research that's really needed to understand specific audiences. And even kind of see that honestly was not something that I even thought of when you were talking about, where ATMs are located, where you're putting ATMs, because and it's funny because I specifically haven't gone to ATMs at nighttime or things like that. So it's subconscious things that I'm thinking, but it's interesting to hear that that's being kind of rolled into marketing and product.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important. One, the user research aspect, but two, that representation piece, because going back to, I think there are a lot of people designing financial products for people who don't look like them. And that is just inherently difficult to do if you don't have that deep understanding of your user and representation of people who look like your customers.
Mm-hmm. And then what is one thing that you have really enjoyed in working in the finance fintech space?
Yeah, so I think in tech, we tend to often veer towards, mission driven, and we all think we're changing the world. I think what's really special, especially in certain areas of the fintech space, we truly are creating something that can demonstrably improve people's lives. I think that is actually rare to find at a lot of companies, where what you do has a positive impact. And you can even see that in the underlying business model, right? We only do well when our members do well, versus a lot of, I think companies actually end up being zero sum when you think about it, where they only do well at the expense of their customers. So really working in a positive sum business. I've often joked at other places of work, it's not life or death. I think really when you think about when it comes to people's money, it is very much their livelihood. It impacts their ability to pay the bills, be able to not having a card decline when they're paying for dinner with their kids. So it is very gratifying working in this space. I think it is, and what I think is also special about that too, all those difficult growing pains that I think a lot of high growth companies go through, so much of that is easier when everyone is there for the right reasons and there for the mission, right? You can always tie back to, what should we do? Well, we need to do what's right for our members. And I think it just creates a much more interesting camaraderie and working dynamic with colleagues.
Um, I think, have you guys kind of seen the growth in the fintech space and people turning towards using it as opposed to, I think, for slightly older people that have been banking with traditional banks for a long time, I think there's a little bit of a stigma and a distrust in getting onto an app and banking versus, being able to drive to a physical bank and go in and see a teller. Have you guys kind of seen that growth during the pandemic, or do you think it's still going to continue to grow over the next couple of years?
I think the trust issue is still a huge area of opportunity. It is very much table stakes in terms of acquiring lots of users, especially older users. That said, I think what's been interesting that we've sort of toyed with, and I've seen other companies do this as well, is sort of this mobile banking and branchlessness as a feature, not a bug, especially during COVID. I think it's especially true for millennials and Gen Z, sort of that branchless virtual bank has a lot of benefits, right? During the pandemic, at one point, I had to open up a joint account with my husband at a traditional bank. And I couldn't do it remotely, which was the most high friction, frustrating process where we had to actually go into a physical bank. And there actually wasn't a banker there, which I guess you need like in a special position to actually open up a joint account. So then we had to come back at another time, and it wasn't readily apparent when there would be an open window because there was no scheduling system in place. And that was all just to open up account where I just wanted to give them my money, just take my money. And it was just so hard. So there's still, I would say there's still a long way to go on the traditional bank side, where it's still very high friction process, even to do the most basic of actions. And I think as long as that continues to persist, there's a huge advantage to, going with a neobank.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the audience then is still skewing for Chime very much on the younger side? And do you think that it's more female to male, or do you think it's still kind of an even split?
Yeah, I mean, we do skew more female, and I think that is partly due to kind of what we alluded to earlier, right? Women do tend to be more likely to earn less and are more likely to live paycheck to paycheck, and that means a lot of traditional banks aren't good products for them, and then a product like Chime is. So we do tend to skew more female. We do tend to skew younger. We are starting to see some inroads, especially I think with older Americans. I think partly some of that is overcoming that like initial trust and what is a neobank or a virtual bank. I think as it becomes more just commonplace, we'll see some of those barriers to entry decrease, and I think we'll see wider adoption.
And this is going back to a point you made earlier. I know that you said the growth within the fintech space has been astronomical over the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years. I think what I've seen is not only just neobanks, but then also there's a lot of financial products around teaching kids how to manage money, and there's just been so many apps that popped up. How do you guys make sure that you're maintaining share of voice, that you're not getting lost in the shuffle amongst kind of all of the competitors that are starting to pop up?
Yeah, that is an interesting challenge. I think one, trust and credibility, as we talked about, adopting sort of a virtual bank requires sort of a leap of faith. I think that is one area where being sort of a front runner, right? We have established credibility. We've been in this space for many years, right? We're FDIC insured. All the protections you enjoy with a physical bank, you enjoy with Chime. So I think that trust and credibility goes a long way. We have great brand cash, I would say. And I think, I think more and more the banking space is going to be heavily commoditized. Banking as a service has really made it very easy to, spin up a financial service product or a neobank product. I think one remaining to being innovative in terms of what products and features we continue to build and making sure we're building the right ones, especially for our audience and our members, is going to be important, and we continue to do that. And then I think that brand piece is going to be important as well. So in a very heavily commoditized space, how do you differentiate between very identical products? It's going to be the one with the higher brand recognition and the one that you can trust, that has been around and has established credibility.
Mm-hmm. Which, so we've done a lot of work on the influencer side within the financial space, and I think it's been a great way to kind of lend certain voices to kind of financial products and financial services, because I think sometimes audiences don't necessarily view financial products as a sexy product to get served ads for.
Yeah.
And I know that obviously a lot of times, traditional banks will associate themselves with sports initiatives or things like that. Are there certain kind of larger scale initiatives or things that you guys are aligning yourself with, not only to build the trust, but maybe to kind of grab the attention of specific audiences?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly veering more in the influencer world and partnership world. We've got a partnership with the Dallas Mavericks. So, and I think this is something a lot of neobanks are starting to follow as well. So we've seen other neobanks start to pursue also partnerships in the sporting realm. I'd say, it's kind of an interesting question. I think for a long time, marketing and financial services hasn't always been perceived as glamorous or sexy. Financial services is just not sexy. I think some of that's changing, right? You see more and more interesting marketing coming out of a lot of these financial service companies. I mean, if you watched the Super Bowl, so many of those ads were a lot of crypto companies, some financial services, and they were doing really unique marketing. I think Klarna has a really great marketing program as well. They've done really interesting things, especially on Instagram, right? Like, you wouldn't think of Klarna as a very visual product. And would you have channel fit with something like Instagram that is very visual, but sort of the whole dipping a pink thing, right? That was a very unique way to, I think, build a lot of brand recognition. So I think the possibilities there. And I think whoever does it well, going back to how do you differentiate yourself in a heavily commoditized industry, having a very strong brand and identity is going to be a big piece of that.
I definitely agree. I think outside, you're right, on the Instagram side, we've obviously seen financial be important there, but then on the TikTok side, we've started to see that growth in people doing TikTok and some of those hashtag challenges where you're getting larger scale recognition. A lot of the content's very fun and entertaining, which I think sometimes is traditionally very different for what we've seen, in old school financial institutions, especially as we love all of the great legal restrictions and things and working through that. But have you guys explored TikTok? Are you guys thinking about doing TikTok?
Yeah, and we've seen some success so far. I think we ran a sweepstakes. Sweepstakes has been a really great growth lever. So also thinking about creative ways to activate your community and then do sort of fun, interesting things that even sort of in the unsexy financial services sphere, right? Especially the sweepstakes mechanism. It's you can use it in a way that can be a very fun and enticing sort of like call to action for existing members and prospects. So yeah, sweepstakes is an interesting one. We're also very mindful too, right? Part of what we want to do is financial education and financial literacy. How can we do those things in sort of interesting and fun ways? So one, right, we're continuing to fulfill our mission to help people achieve financial peace of mind and progress. but also, be able to brand ourselves in a very sort of fun and exciting way, but also deliver value, and make sure that we're still presenting ourselves as an established financial institution.
Yeah, I think that financial education has become such a big topic that we've seen on social, regardless of platform, that I think a huge millennial audience is all hitting that age where you're buying homes and investing and having kids, and it's a really important topic, especially for Gen Z as well, as they kind of age up, to make sure that they understand, how to manage their money, and what, is the best option for them.
Yeah.
I think we're at time, I believe, but it was great to chat. Excited to see what Chime is going to have coming in the back half of the year, and hopefully, the fintech space continues to grow, and really welcome women into all aspects of the business.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Courtney. It was great being here.
Thank you.